Hello, everyone, and welcome to an EA Zoom presentation. My name is Michelle Dench. I am an astrologer, and today I want to talk about just a theme that I feel is present in the evolutionary journey that we're all facing right now. Originally, I thought, well, I'll talk about the eclipses because they're really relevant to evolution in particular. For those unfamiliar with eclipses, they are lunations that are occurring on or around the nodes of the moon, which are essentially points in space that in the evolutionary paradigm are pointing to the core of our evolutionary journey, both the soul's past life incarnations, the past energetics, past dynamics, and what is, calling us forward, let's say, in evolution. And with the nodes currently in Aries and Libra right now, we are just about to have the first of the set of eclipses this time of the year, which are going to close out 2023. And it's an interesting set of eclipses, but this set of eclipses is almost the same energetics as the whole end of the year. So I thought I would talk a little bit about this theme of, is it the end or is it the beginning? I'm not sure. And I'll share my screen with you just so you can get a sense of where we are. This is just the present moment here. We have Pluto retrograde in Aquarius right now. We have Mars, which has just recently crossed the South Node in Libra and is preparing in these next few days to move into a square to Pluto, which will essentially be a last quarter square of Mars. And we have a new phase conjunction with Mars. And a part of why I called this talk Eclipses, Phases, and Evolution is because I think right now, more than ever, I'm beginning to realize how critical the phases are to the undertone of what the evolution is all about. So here we have Mars in a last quarter square phase, and this is what Jeffrey Wolf Green says about the last quarter phase. Dane Rudyard called this phase a crisis in consciousness. It is a major crisis involving the individual's belief systems, knowing of what to believe. Belief systems reflect the human need to create philosophies, including religious philosophies that explain the nature of our phenomenal existence. Any group of people will have a consensus belief or philosophical system that explains the nature of existence. In this phase, the soul must rebel against such consensus beliefs in order to expand its consciousness and embrace universal truths. Thus, what takes place, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, is a shedding of the skins in which the soul progressively begins to decondition itself from the impact of consensus opinion. In a larger sense, this phase correlates to the beginning of a process in which the soul desires to bring culmination and completion to anything that is not yet finished or resolved from the cycle of development that preceded this phase. Right, so if we are looking at what that means in terms of evolution, with Pluto being the soul's impulse, the desire for evolution, and Mars being that underlying will that is moving forward that evolutionary journey, then we have coming up on October 14th, the first in this last set of eclipses for this year. And it is a new moon eclipse just before the South Node. So here we have Mars now, by the time of this eclipse, on the other side of the South Node, already in Scorpio, a sign of its, domicile in traditional astrology. We have also Pluto direct at its station degree. So there's something that's already been initiated relative to that last quarter phase that we were just looking at. And here in terms of this lunation, it is a Baslamic phase, new moon. And what Jeffrey Wolf Green says about this phase correlates to the need to bring completion to an entire cycle begun at the new phase conjunction, so that a brand new evolutionary cycle of development can begin. All unfinished business, incomplete business, patterns, stages of development will be recreated so that the necessary culmination can take place. Thus, consciousness now becomes highly internalized, self-contemplated, as it reflects and considers the nature of reality, right? So even in both of these phases, we have something happening. We have a crisis happening. And, eclipses are often associated with great change, cataclysmic change, things, and in particular, we would think that there's so much ending associated with this particular lunation, even though it, from a lunation perspective, is a new moon, which is often considered a new beginning or the seed of something. And if we think about it in terms of what has to happen in order for evolution to occur, right, in both of those phases where Jeffrey's talking about what has to happen, the crisis, right, the causation of some sort of internal reflection and deeply internalized state of evolution is happening here relative to this. And we have something that is instinctually beginning something new. That new thing is something maybe quite old that is a part of an underlying deconditioning process, right? It's a part of, we don't know what we don't know. So the unknown is always very scary, and it's challenging for people, it's like, I've been thinking a lot about something that I'm desiring in my life, right? Mars and Pluto relating to the desires, and Pluto being the bottom line desire of the soul. Thinking about and considering what the things that I'm desiring in my life, and how even on some level, though I can imagine that I want something, I want the conditions of my life to be different than they are right now. I want my relationships to be different than they are right now. I want my experiences of relationship or connection, or my work, or my, whatever it is in your life that is undergoing this deep source of internal and external evolution, that part of the self that is desiring the change itself is not aware at the level of consciousness of what the change would be or becomes, right? That's the same thing as saying the caterpillar is completely unaware of what the life of a butterfly is like. And even sometimes when I'm thinking about what I desire, I have a hard time imagining for myself what my life would look like if I were being in that way, if I were behaving in that way, or if I were living in that way, if I had relationships that felt that way, if my experiences would. And so that presents the crisis there, is that we're not yet in a place where we can imagine ourselves into the new thing, because on some level, the deconditioning process is not yet underway. And I think a big part of what's happening with these pairs of eclipses is then we have the next eclipse, which is on the 28th of October. And that eclipse is a partial eclipse because it's essentially out of sign in a way. It's still within the range of 10 degrees or less to the nodes, but we have this Taurus, Scorpio fixed axis. We have Mars and Mercury and the sun in the sign of Scorpio, along with Ceres, the mother goddess. And then we have the moon in Taurus along with Jupiter, right? Jupiter opposite Mars, by the way, in this eclipse, really strong signature, a retrograde Jupiter ruled by Venus. Venus in both of these eclipses in the sign of Virgo, right? And the Venus in Virgo reality is a reality of purification, supplication, devotion, right? It is a reality of how do we eliminate all the worries, doubts, insecurities that have undermined our ability to be in the new. That's a part of, right? Virgo, it can be incredibly meticulous and have all kinds of responsibilities for needing to orchestrate things to be good, to be just right, to be perfect, right? And then the reality of relationship is that it's messy, it's not perfect, it's, you know, often far from that. And so do we avoid the necessary discomfort of meeting the imperfection of our life, and where that breeds a sense of I have to do something because I'm not good enough, I don't have enough, this isn't the right, you know, situation, this isn't the ashram that I imagine myself living in, right? This isn't the simple monastic life that I imagine myself being in. Instead, my life is complicated and difficult and filled with lots of things to adjust, to deal with, to clean, to, you know, resolve. I often think of Virgo as needing to resolve inner emptiness, inner aloneness, inner senses of where life and our physical manifestation on earth, right? Because the soul is timeless. The soul is beyond the physical body. It's beyond this incarnation, this life. The soul is essentially source, you know, the desire to return to source returning to itself. But then Venus, Mars, we have, you know, the mundane, our reality of the human incarnation, which comes with these particular, what we would call nodal lessons. And we can be assured that in some way, these eclipses are bringing nodal lessons, right? Lessons in our physical and financial security, how we are dealing with our resources, lessons in facing the discomfort of intimacy, of connection, of attachments, and being able to work to resolve. Everything is about working towards resolution because the soul in and of itself is always going to be using relationship as the vehicle for resolving the desires of the soul, right? This is basic, you know, the basic principles. And so what we have in this, you know, full moon essentially is also that we've got Mars, who's moved, you know, out of the sign of Libra, beyond its first quarter squares, moving into, or beyond its conjunction, moving towards that first phase of evolution. And I want to go back to the phasal relationships, because with this eclipse, we're in a new phase. So it's Mars is pretty close. It's no longer in that last quarter square. It's in a new phase to the south node. It's the ruler of the north node. And in that new phase, we are beginning to emerge into a new identity, a new way of relating. And in particular, I think it's to the crisis of the past. It's similar to realizing, oh, okay, I desire to evolve, right? I desire to have a different life experience. I desire, for changes in whatever areas of life that these eclipses are falling in, right? Taurus, Scorpio, Libra, Aries. We also have the cardinal cross activated with Pluto in Capricorn and the polarity point in Cancer. We have, Venus predominantly ruling, and Mercury is very closely involved in both of these eclipses. So Mercury, in the first lunation that I was sharing with you, you'll see, is on the front side of the sun and the moon, and in the sign of Libra, ruled by Venus in Virgo. So they are in mutual reception to one another. So I think of Mercury as the messenger of these eclipses, because Mercury is sort of going down into the crisis that we're facing in our lives and emerging with an answer, essentially. That's kind of the way I see it. So if we let's just follow the in between. I want to look at the transits and between these two. So here's the day after the eclipse, and then we can just follow Mercury with the sun crosses the south node, then Mercury crosses the sun, makes its superior conjunction to the sun. So that's the cazimi that happens and this is the midpoint of the retrograde cycle. It's in between the last Mercury in Virgo retrograde, which we just completed, and then the next retrograde, I believe, will be when Mercury's in Capricorn, or at the end of the Sagittarius Capricorn cycle. So we have Mars already in the sign of Scorpio. And what's interesting about all of this is that Lilith has been in the sign of Libra, and she's played a very big, I think, an instrumental role in terms of being able to identify from an evolutionary perspective what exactly we are liberating from. As each of these planets clears the south node, they each make a square to Pluto. So it's sort of like tipping your hat to the master of the underworld and saying, okay, I don't know quite how to get free of this past, but I know that the way that I have to think about my life, the way that I have to behave in my life, the things that I need to do in my life have to change, because that crisis of consciousness spurs the fact that the underlying system can no longer exist. And in my personal reflections, I was driving around today and looking at, Starbucks has their pumpkin spice latte, and Wendy's and Taco Bell, and and it began my thoughts to really reflecting on how, like, we have all of these institutions, commercialized food systems, things that we sort of like, people get obsessed with the pumpkin spice latte, but they are inconsequential and actually on some level destructive to our health, to our well-being, to our natural resources, to the world itself. And yet, as long as they're sort of like a symbol of normal life and not questioned from the perspective of, oh, how is this serving me? I'm spending, $9 on this latte. Is this financially viable for me to continue to spend this money? I'm drinking this sugar drink. Is this physically healthy for me to do this? I'm spending my chi, my life force energy focused on the excitement of when the pumpkin spice latte is coming back. No offense to Starbucks, but I'm just using these as examples of evolution, because the crisis is from the consensus consciousness, right? It's Jeffrey Wolf Green is talking about how the break, the rebellion. And then, so when we realize like, oh, my whole life is dominated by these things, which have, and, I'm not speaking from my own life perspective, but I'm speaking from a consensus perspective. It's dominated by these things, which are actually a drain to my resources, a drain to my livelihood, a drain to my life force. Then there's the point in which we have to make a different decision. We have to choose to do something differently. And I heard this guy talking about how relationships have to change. And he was saying the 3 things that destroy relationships: not bringing the full self into relationship. So that is me and my partner. We are living in a way where I'm sort of an image that I think he wants me to be, right? That would be the Libra dynamic. I'm behaving in a way that I think is pleasing. I'm doing the thing that I think will keep his love and affection. Or I'm hiding, Scorpio, right? The other half of that, I'm hiding the parts of myself which I feel will be unlovable. And we can do that very easily in all kinds of relationships, not just romantic relationships. We can compartmentalize our identity. I bring this part of myself to work. I bring this part of myself into my friendships. I bring this part of myself into my romantic relationship. And partners can seemingly live simultaneous, completely different realities from one another, never really knowing one another, behaving in ways or patterns with one another that continue to reinforce the belief that I cannot bring my full self into this relationship. I cannot trust this person with my full self. And because of that, I am either forced to do what? Capricorn, suppress, or, Scorpio, hide, or Libra, participate in putting a sort of face or a way, or Virgo, really, how do I work to make myself so perfect? If I could be the perfect person that my partner wants me to be, right? Or Leo, I don't care. I'm just, concerned with myself, and I don't even care about my partner's thoughts or feelings. Or Cancer, I emotionally deny my emotional reality in order, because bringing my emotional self into the relationship would reinforce the ideas that I'm not safe. And I could go on, I could go through all the signs in the zodiac in terms of how we might be able to play out that not bringing the full self. Then he said, not tending to themselves, right? And so the not tending to themselves is like, do I prioritize everyone else, the other? This is again the Libra dynamic, the other, and at the detriment of my own physical, financial, emotional needs, right? And that is in and of itself, one, it's a survival mechanism. It's a codependency mechanism. It often comes from this feeling of like, maybe we weren't taken care of as a child. Maybe we weren't taught really even how to care for oneself. Maybe we've created an identity around a particular role, like a wife or a mother. And that role, again, Capricorn, is so engendered in our conditioning that we don't have any idea, like the mom guilt. I've heard people talk about this thing, mom guilt, that comes from a particular role that is what is a facet of mothering that engenders a sense of guilt if one is to do things that are self-valuing, self-provisioning, self-caring, self-nurturing. And then the last thing he said is not healing past trauma, right? And we can see with Pluto square to the nodal axis, the resolution node is the south node in Libra. So this is a deep, call from that perspective to resolving, healing past trauma, healing the past, whether it's past lives or past relationships. I would say, from my perspective, it speaks more to the past relationship dynamics that are deeply creating that sense of internal suppression or oppression. And he said, so this is a quote from Michael Todd, who I watched an interview with him earlier today. He wrote a book called Relationship Goals. A decision turns into a discipline, and a discipline turns into a desire that will change your destiny. And that's kind of what I feel about the relationship of these eclipses, because we can make even one decision during these times, and maybe we might be impelled to make many decisions, but even one small decision, then it becomes a discipline. And that's the element of this Saturn here in Pisces, which is almost at the end of its retrograde cycle as we come, to the end of this eclipse season. I'm going to there we go. November 4th, just after the eclipses are over, as we're in the midst of Scorpio season, which I think is one of the most powerful seasons for that shedding, the death, rebirth, ending, the veil, that people consider that the veil is thin, that the spirit world and is very close at hand. And what that does for us when we're intimate to our own mortality, when we're intimate to the mortality of life, when we're connected to the pain and the suffering from the past, and we are hopeful that the future is not a repeat of the past, right? That would mean the inverse of these three things in terms of, and this could be redefined, when I say, is it the beginning or the end? That's a good question, because in some places this may be the end of a relationship or the end of a job or even the end of a person's life. Or it could be the beginning of a new relationship or the beginning of a new calling or a new, new consciousness, a new identity. It might emerge out of this time that is directly related to a forgiveness, a relinquishing, a resolving of the past that comes out of what we're talking about, that crisis of consciousness that is inviting us into, okay, if I can imagine that I want to be living in a different way, but I cannot imagine how my life can get to that different way. But we can make a decision to a discipline, which turns into a desire, right? Anything that is discipline often is associated with things that are hard, right? Exercise could be a good, a discipline, a choice. I'm going to exercise every day and I'm going to do something that conditions my body. At first, that is going to be painful. The muscle fabric literally will tear and stretch as you're building more muscle, more capacity, more strength. And over time, that strength will become something new. The body changes, physical form will change and something new will emerge. And if it becomes a new identity, a new lifestyle, right? Whatever the evolution is for us, if it becomes a new way of relating, I'm going to bring my full self into all my relationships. I'm going to tend to myself rather than focusing on tending to others or putting the tending of others before the tending of myself. I am going to heal my past trauma so that the past no longer repeats itself, but I can hold the vision of a future self that is able to become something that I experience as a part of my daily life, because the discipline then turns into a desire. It turns into a desire to live in a new way, and so you stop, buying lattes, and you stop eating junk food, and you start, I'm giving mundane examples, but this could be all kinds of things in a person's life. You start having uncomfortable conversations that are honest and raw. You start revealing the secret self identity to all the people that matter to you. And maybe you suffer the loss of a friendship or a family member, or you have to set boundaries, or you realize that you have to learn how to communicate in a different way in order to feel the sense of safety that when your past traumas come up, that they don't get in the way of your desired evolution, of your desired relationship relating, right? And that becomes then the Virgo here in this case. And we have Venus and Mars sort of traveling in this balsamic phase to one another. They are going to make a conjunction. They're both going to close this year out with a conjunction to Pluto. And then in the new year, they're going to make a conjunction to one another. So you can see, for Mars is the slower moving planet. Mars is going to, though, catch up to Pluto right at 0 degrees. And at the same time, basically, that Venus is. This is in February of next year. So we're working from this point on with this Mars in a new phase to the South Node, with Mars moving into a last quarter phase with Pluto. Yeah, this is what these eclipses are all about. It's essentially a portal and a gateway that's opening to a real closing crisis. And it's not only closing the end of this year, but it's closing everything relative to this Pluto and Capricorn cycle. When Venus and Mars make their conjunction to Pluto next year, that will be their first new phase conjunction to Pluto in the sign of Aquarius. It's a completely different reality, right, from that point onwards. And I've been working in my Love Evolution class series following these transits. I did an overview of their whole thing in a free, I think, EA Zoom talk that I did a while ago. But these eclipses, I think, are particularly important because both Venus and Mars at this end of the year cycle are moving into that last quarter square with Pluto and moving into that last quarter phase of evolution relative to the whole Pluto journey. So I just wanted to say, is it the beginning or the end? Well, whenever an ending is happening, it is the beginning of something new. It's just rare that in the ending phase that we see the emergence of something new. And even in the beginning, if something is beginning, in the beginning phase, we rarely see what is ending. All things in their time and in their evolution, all states of consciousness, all parts of our lives, like I can look back and see, the girl who used to eat Taco Bell and drink pumpkin spice lattes, she had to die, right, in order for me to be here today. She couldn't exist. her level of consciousness couldn't be here. Isn't this? And even in my desires at this point in my life, what I am in some way has to end, has to die. What I think about myself or my life, because if our thoughts are on some level creating our reality, then for sure, if we desire a different reality on some level, those thoughts have to end, right? Everything in some way then becomes a simultaneous ending and beginning. And so I think that is what we are looking at, my friends. I hope that you enjoyed this little evolutionary recap of both the eclipses and the phases that we're working with right now. For those of you who are interested in more on this, particularly, the Jeffrey Wolf Green Association of Evolutionary Astrologers is putting on a conference. It's this weekend. It begins with the Pluto Paradigm Workshop taught by Deva Green. That workshop will be 2 hours going into the entire Pluto paradigm from the basics, building on this foundational work. And then there will be 14 speakers over the course of 2 days. I'll be teaching on soulmates and karma mates, looking at the relational dynamics between charts, both the synastry and composite charts. And, you know, a lot of what Jeffrey Wolf Green is teaching in the Pluto Volume 2 book, which is essentially like my go-to manual for life right now. And you are welcome to join us. There, you can still register for the conference. You can sign up for any individual class, or if you sign up for the whole weekend pass, you can use the coupon code Pluto to take 10% off. I hope you'll join us. And thank you to everyone who's listening to this. If you have any reflections, anything that touched you, I always love to hear in the comments what was most impactful for you. So thanks so much for listening, my friends.
Thanks, Michelle. We will put links to the conference and to your contact information. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
We'll see you this weekend.
All right. Looking forward to it.
Me too.